Hello, everyone. The title of today's episode is Acceptance. Accept the self, and others will accept you. Again, Mr.Within is at a Italian train station waiting to go from the city of Gerenzano to Mozante. I would like to begin by explaining the title of today's episode, and the title is suggesting that many people in our world today, they are seeking an acceptance from their environment, from society, and sometimes for survival in regards to someone, for example, at a job, or someone, a salesman or something, there are many jobs out there, such people require the acceptance of others, of their realities and viewpoints, but I want to begin by communicating that it's not only in that context, it is also in the context of, I see many young children. I remember making a YouTube video, not for this channel, for another channel I made, it's called Chiller Than the Wind, pretty much. On that channel, on one song I uploaded, this 11-year-old girl wrote a comment about how bad and terrible her life was, in the sense that she wanted to end it. And I was like, wow, she's just 11, it's like there's so much more. So much left of life, so many unexpected things that may enter that one does not know and cannot know from a certain moment in time and space. So pretty much what I want to say is that to accept the self leads to the acceptance of others of that self which is real for you. The self is not just an idea for you, it is an idea for all beings. Every human being, in order to have human rights apply, in order for the human being to be even communicatable to its environment and to its subjective existence, it needs to be a certain self. We say my mind, we say my body, some people say my soul, but at that area of the soul it becomes transparent. The self is an attention to existence which the moment is being. Every person has a sense of self because they're experiencing their self through their sensory perception. The idea of accepting yourself is more of a self-realization than actually accepting a tangible or external projection or object. Experience is a very interesting phenomenon. Experience, if one looks at it very closely, it's as if it's like what the sensory perception is receiving. It is internally storifying. It is making the world into a story for existence to happen. In this sudden podcast, I will be sharing that when we move and when we are dynamic and when there are sounds, we in some sense are existing through a sense of self which seems to be in motion, in some sort of motion. The moment it is in motion, it cannot be internally, not that it cannot, but it becomes much harder for an internal awareness of how the moment is being itself. In Mr. Within's meditative journeys, in some sense, I have gone into nature and I have just sat still, and at times very preferenceless, even before I began these talks. And I would just go sit in nature, simply because the environment I was in, the external environment in society, it would bring trials and tribulations which I felt would overpower me. But when I went into nature, I began to see that when I am silent, when I am still, the language of the mind that is causing the story to be depressed or stressed out, it's just like the ripples on a pond begin to settle when there's no longer rocks or anything being thrown in the pond. So sometimes our problems stick around because we are generating them constantly, because we feel that, we are a self that is in a problem, or there's a problematic sense of existence. The interesting idea in regards to how the self relates to a sense of other is simply in the sense that your sense of self is creating your sense of other. So how you see other people is based really on how you see yourself, at least how people have a certain meaning. You know, it's as if, like, let's say it like this, objectively, you need to have eyes, you need to have perception, and then that perception considers itself as an individual position, which then it can consider other individuals. For example, there have been certain moments, again in nature, where I've just sat there and my sense of self has become the whole moment. It's as if I rather than being a person in a moment, I was a moment in the experience of a person. The Sufi mystic poet Jalaluddin Maulana Rumi has a very interesting quote where he says, "Silence is the language of God, all else is poor translation." He is saying that in our silence we truly witness the experiencer and the what is experienced to become one. So right now that you're hearing my talk, let's say there is something being listened to, and then there's a listener. When you stop identifying with certain motions and movements and you just remain still, that means the greatest meditation is not some kind of practice to try to not have thoughts. You know, it's like, it's very hard to not have thoughts, because it's like someone tells you don't think of an apple, but the idea of apple is immediately projected there. So words begin to evoke images in our cellular planes, and once those images are dynamic in our recognition of them, we feel we have thoughts. So in meditative practice, for example, the teachings of Sri Ramana Maharshi, he speaks about self-inquiry. And in self-inquiry, he's pretty much saying, ask yourself, who am I, or who is experiencing this moment? When you ask it, you will eventually see that it is an attention just present. It is a present attention. This attention at its core is untouchable, is unspeakable, it is pristine. It is as if this attention is allowing novelty to be. I want to share a very interesting story, kind of hilarious story actually. This story is about a bunch of grandkids who do a simple prank on their grandfather, and what the grandfather perceives and experiences kind of suggests how what I'm trying to say in regards to a sense of self creating a sense of other occurs. So there's this grandfather, he's sleeping on a couch. His grandkids are like, okay, let's do something hilarious. They get a stinky little piece of cheese, you know, from the fridge, and, you know, they put it on the grandfather's nose, like on the mustache, underneath his nose when he's asleep. The grandfather, after some time, wakes up and he's like, what's that smell? He gets very angry. He's like, what is this smell? This room stinks. He goes out of the room, goes to another room in the house. He's like, oh my God, this room stinks too. Goes into another room. He says, this room also stinks. And eventually he goes outside, you know, and he's like, oh my God, the whole world stinks. And he doesn't realize that it's a tiny piece of cheese, you know, under his nose. And probably eventually he does, but when he hasn't understood that it's like a tiny thing causing the whole world to be problematic, it's as if the whole world stinks. And sometimes when tiny things make us suffer, we think the whole world is suffering and it's a dark, cruel place and we can't exist properly. Similarly, the idea of self, it is a problematic. If it is a weak self, you are going to think the world is just like a place where weak creatures are in. If you think your sense of self is it's been treated in a cruel way, you're going to think the whole world is a cruel place. This sense of self, the best way to dismantle the aspects of it that don't serve you is to wonder about its origin. When you wonder about origin, you come into the realization again that attention is originating space and time. The Buddha has a very interesting concept. He says, when you look at an object, for example, let's say you look at a cup of tea, you know, some person looks at that cup of tea and let's say you can't see the tea in it. Some person says, no, that cup is filled with, for example, tea, and another person says it's filled with coffee or whatever you want to choose. What is being perceived is different stories where a subjective experiencer and identity is associating very differently with what it is perceiving. There have been certain moments in my experience where I've been in situations and I've reacted a certain way. I've acknowledged the situation a certain way. And I felt like, oh my God, how was I so incapable? Then, through deeper self-inquiry, I began to realize the reason I felt incapable in that situation was because, for example, in a situation in my youth, I had had a similar experience. And then again, before that situation, even to the point before the times of this life, I kind of realized that experiences or the emotional intensity and reception of the experience it echoes into other experiences that we have. Heraclitus, this Greek philosopher, he says, no man can step in the same river twice, and it is not the same man and it is not the same river. What he means by this is that every moment is a new moment with a new identification and association of self. And once this is understood, we realize that our biggest problems are being attached to things that we no longer need to be. And so we kind of discover the value in detachment in meditation and all that. So what that means is many of the people in this world who are going through depression and stress, and they feel they can't get out of it, and it's the hardship is constantly there. Actually, the remedy is very simple. Different situations also require different remedies. That means different illnesses require different medicine. But pretty much, many ailments in regards to depression can leave you the moment you are still and silent, without the story constantly projecting an incapable self. When this occurs, if you just go 10 to 20 minutes and be silent, you're going to eventually see, again, the ripples will fade, the ripples of complexity will fade, and you're going to find an instant freedom. I'm going to share another story. It's a dervish story from a long time ago. This is not my train, by the way. I'm going to let this train pass. Just like an unnecessary thought. Okay. The story goes like this. There's this kid who wants to get rid of his problems and his suffering and all the pain and sorrow he's feeling. He one day sees this dervish wise man, the Sufi kind of master, walking in a market kind of with his grocery bag, getting some kind of fruits or something. He suddenly sees the guy, notices the guy, runs up to him, and he's like, "Hey, wise man, please help me out. I need to get rid of my attachments, my chain of problems," something like that. He says, "My pain of attachments." And so the man is looking at him there, and he doesn't say anything, and it's like this awkward stare down for like maybe 30 seconds or something. And the kid's like, "Oh my God, is this guy getting angry because I'm disturbing his normal fruit buying routine?" What happens is that the Sufi mystic suddenly goes by a nearby column, and the kid's kind of like, going with him. And he puts his grocery bag beside this column and begins hugging the column, like holding on to it, And he begins suddenly shouting, "Please save me from this pillar! Please save me from this pillar! Somebody please save me from this pillar!" Eventually he says it so much and so loud and in such a crazy fashion, the kid's just like freaking out. It's like, what's going on? And then he suddenly sees a crowd kind of gather around the guy. He's like, "What's the problem? What's going on here? What's the racket about?" And the kid gets a bit humiliated. And the guy's non-stop, "Save me from this pillar, save me from this pillar," something like that. The kid suddenly sees as the crowd is becoming more and more, he suddenly runs up to the guy. He's like, "What are you doing? I came here to ask you to gain some wisdom from you. What is this? You're acting crazy. You know, if you want to save yourself from the pillar, just let your hands go. Just let it go, okay? Suddenly in that moment, the dervish wise man looks at him, smiles, he lets go of the pillar, and he's like, okay, now you see that your attachments and suffering and problem and sorrows all can be gone in an instant. You know, you can let it go. And the kid realizes that his problems are momentarily being kept. That means he is originating his sense of self and the sense of the world around him, the sense of other, to be in a way that is not serving him. But in an instant, he can let it go. Sometimes we have to, I think it was Lao Tzu, he said you have to let go of who we want to be to kind of become who we truly are, you know. And in reality, there are many moments that can make a person feel insignificant. But once you let go of the insignificance, it's good, it's all good, you know. Everything becomes more significant, you know. And that insignificance at times is experiences and memories of incapability. In other words, somebody eats a fruit, the fruit wasn't good, he gets sick. He can't blame the surface of the fruit, you know. It's also the depth inside the fruit, the contents of it truly, that is creating the incapability, the inability. So in self-inquiring and studying your sense of self, you give yourself an opportunity in silence and stillness to realize how the world is being originated by you. You know, philosophy is not something just for university students. Back in the day, pretty much every human being who wondered, what is this? How are we here existing? You know, was to some degree a philosopher. You know, many scientists nowadays I see, they don't value philosophy. They feel it is too soon providing consequences and conclusions of natural law. But many natural sciences and many scientists who discovered these laws in science and the laws of nature, they were philosophers at first. They were wonders of the essence of their existence and their experience, you know? So life is a very interesting game that we're playing with ourselves and realizing that we're not only the game master, we're also the player. Or we're not just the player, we're also the game master. We are keeping the world the way it is in our eyes, even though our eyes and our sight can change. So what I want to leave you, dear beings, is that once you study the self, you will find the clarity because you will see that self in you. That is the power of observation. You know, for example, if you try to solve a math problem, you know, a couple times, you're going to get new feelings and a new sense of how your ability is in solving that problem. Zen Master Dogen was very enlightened sage. He says to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to awaken to the nature of all things. Clarity is a great self-allowance, which then will be seen in others. Always let yourself exist in a better world, because it can be done in an instant. Much blessings, namaste.